Hey everyone! My Kindle Unlimited free 3-month trial adventure is over, and I am exhausted. It was fun, and I enjoyed it, and I'm grateful I had the opportunity. But it was a lot of reading, and there are things I wish I did differently. So, the final count for how many books I read comes to 30, which in a way sounds like a lot. I have read 28 books so far this year, and that's tremendous, considering that in all of 2019 I only read 48 books. So if my goal for this year is 50, I'm already more than halfway to that goal. But considering how much I intended to read, because I wanted to milk that free trial for everything it was worth, and considering the things that I had saved that I wanted to read, I'm a little disappointed in myself. My biggest disappointment is that in the month of December, the first month of the 3 months, because this started on November 28th, I saw the notice of this free offer right before I went to sleep, and I was like, I'll take it, yes! Not thinking about the fact that it was going to be the holiday season, and when on earth was I going to have time to read? So, within the month of December, I only read 2 books through Kindle Unlimited. I did read some other books, because, I don't know, I didn't have my head on straight or something. The other 28 were in January and February. The trial ended last night, Thursday. I didn't know what time it was going to run out, so I stopped at midnight, and I was literally reading to the last minute. I hit cancel on my subscription at 11:59, and I still had the book open to the last page. So 28 books in 2 months. Really, though, the bulk of those were read in the last 2 weeks, which is why, if this video seems a little disjointed and distracted and not up to the usual quality, it's because my brain is a little bit frazzled right now. I'm a little fried. Don't do what I did, kids. Don't waste the first month, and don't end up trying to cram 12 books into the last 6 days, or whatever it was. This last week, I think I read 2 books each day, and then on the last day, which was yesterday, I tore through 3 books. And I wouldn't recommend that. My eyes were strained, I had a headache when I was going to sleep. It was not good. So it's been my intention all along to give you a run-through of all that I read, but I'm so low energy at the moment that I am not going to do it thoroughly. And it's just as well, because a lot of the books that I read were part of a series. I read 3 series, whatever, while I was going through Kindle Unlimited. I wasn't going through it. It wasn't a trial. It was a trial. Should I start over? No, it's fine. Fortunately, I do make good decisions sometimes, and I did write down a few brief notes after I read each book, and I will share those with you. But first, I've got to go back in time a little bit. There's some stuff I read in December that I never told you about, that wasn't part of this. So these are all books that I got through the library. I'm just gonna blatantly go off my notes here for the sake of my own sanity. I read Murder for Christmas by Francis Duncan. This is another Mordecai Tremaine book. I mentioned reading another one a few months ago. Before then, I had never heard of this detective. The series was written in the 30s or 40s, I think, and it's not very well known. I wasn't crazy about that book, and I wasn't super crazy about this one either. It is set at Christmas, which is nice, and that's why I read it at Christmas time. All the characters, including Tremaine, are assembled at a house in the country for a Christmas party. I wrote, this time I didn't exactly figure out the murderer, but I wasn't surprised at all by the reveal, and it became tedious waiting for Tremaine to figure out things that I'd already suspected. All the right ingredients, just not executed to my satisfaction. Agatha Christie and Nio Marsh did the Christmas mystery better, even if they didn't have a dead Father Christmas. Not interested in reading anymore. So there you go. I also read The Lady in the Lake by Raymond Chandler. This is a Philip Marlowe mystery. I chose to read it in December because I had this idea that it was somehow Christmas related, because there's a film, what is it, 1944, 1946, directed by and starring Robert Montgomery as Philip Marlowe, and it is famous for being, I think, entirely shot as a point of view film. I haven't seen all of it, I've only seen part of it, but I was under the impression that it had something to do with Christmas. It at least had a Christmas tree in the background in one scene. So I was surprised to find that the book, at least, is not Christmas related at all. In my opinion, it was sometimes a 3-star book, sometimes a 4-star book. Not as good as Farewell My Lovely, which I read a couple years ago. It's always been my intention to read another Philip Marlowe book, to read several Philip Marlowe books. I've got The High Window and The Long Goodbye on my to-read list, and they're just waiting for me. I didn't love the mystery itself, but Chandler has a way of describing things that is so unusual and so funny that I enjoyed the reading process, even if I wasn't really into figuring out who had done it. I do intend to read another, and sooner than it took me to get around to this one. And I read As You Wish, Inconceivable Tales from the Making of the Princess Bride by Cary Elwes and Joe Layden. Cary Elwes, of course, played Wesley / the Dread Pirate Roberts in that film, and while I don't necessarily consider The Princess Bride as one of my favorites, I like it, it's really funny, that did not deter my enjoyment of this making of book. There were a lot of really great stories here. I didn't know that Cary Elwes was such a funny person, and it was surprisingly heartwarming. So if you're a fan of the movie at all, I definitely recommend reading this book. It was much better than I expected. Okay, with that out of the way, let's move on to the Kindle Unlimited stuff. I purposely chose to only read books that I couldn't get anywhere else. I didn't want to waste my 3 months on something that I could get from the library or that I could get anywhere at any time. That means there's a good chance that there are no books on this list that you've ever heard of, unless you have also had Kindle Unlimited. Some of you might be a little disappointed by what I read, I don't know, maybe not, but if you like it when I talk about classics or erudite literature, well, what I'm trying to say here is that everything I read was pretty light. It seems to me that most of the stuff available on the Kindle Unlimited service is light. You got a lot of romances, clean romances, and not so clean romances, mysteries, thrillers, horror stuff that you don't know whether to classify it as straight horror or thrillers, stuff that authors generally just crank out and readers fly through. There are classics, but I passed over those. So the first thing that I read, and really the reason why I grabbed at the Kindle Unlimited trial in the first place, was the Beatrice Hyde-Clare Regency mystery series by Lynn Messina. I did mention the first two in the series the last time I talked about books that I had read, so I'm not going to dwell for too long on these books. About the Brazen curiosity I wrote, rather delightful. The whodunit itself definitely took a backseat to the characterization, dialogue, interactions, etc. Very humorous dialogue and good storytelling. The murderer reveal, a little sketchy, comes out of nowhere. Book number 2, A Scandalous Deception, I said, I'm loving this, except that the mystery is still less interesting than the love story. Book number 3, An Infamous Betrayal, I wrote, that kiss in the hat carriage, woo! The ending was absolutely ridiculous, of course, but it was fun. Can't believe... oh, that's kind of a spoiler. Now I just hope that book 4 doesn't have a big misunderstanding or a dreaded love triangle or some other nonsense that could be easily resolved with a little communication. It didn't. Really. Well, book number 4, A Nefarious Engagement, I wrote, in full disclosure, I skimmed the bulk of this one from halfway into chapter 2 to about 68%. The repetition and navel-gazing is so extensive. That was a big thing in these books. There's a lot of repetition of everything that came before, and then I was disappointed at the turn it took. Less fun, more angsty. B makes questionable decisions and won't tell Kesgrave what's going on. He's not in it nearly enough, so it's a huge breath of fresh air when they come clean with each other, and he proves himself to be just the most perfect, wonderful man that a woman could ask for. Yeah, a large part of why I enjoyed this series as much as I did was thanks to the Duke of Kesgrave, real name Damien something, I can't remember his last name. He was hot, yes, but a large part of his appeal was the fact that he was also smart and understanding and gentle and supportive and kind and humble and loyal and all kinds of wonderful qualities. Book 5 was a treacherous performance, and I said it had some of the best dialogue in the series. Did seem to go on a little long, and Bee's suspicion of everyone's every word or move got tiresome. Like she would say, she seemed upset, but was she really? Or he scowled in pain, but was he just pretending? It might also have been tiresome because this really felt like two mysteries squeezed together into one. But as far as characters and dialogue and humor goes, this was one of the best. It was also one of the most romantic. Supposedly there's going to be a 6th book coming out in spring 2020, and when I saw that at the end of the 5th book, I was like, oh, come on, you gotta be kidding me. I think the series is plenty good enough if it just ends at book 5. After that, or rather in the middle of that, I also read a couple standalone thrillers. Not terribly proud of my choices here. I read a book called The Perfect Child by Lucinda Barry, which is about a couple that work in the medical field who want to have a child and can't, and they end up taking in a little girl who's found wandering in a parking lot covered in blood and injured. Right from the beginning, you know something's going to go horribly wrong, and I would say it was quite predictable, but shocking and disturbing nonetheless. It's one of those books where all the characters make really bad decisions and suffer for it. Am I giving it away by saying it's an evil child story? I don't think so. It's pretty obvious from the blurb. It was very disturbing, but I also couldn't stop reading, and I think I read it all in one sitting. I also read a book called Disturbed by Jennifer Jaynes, and I didn't like it. I don't think I liked it at all. I wrote, it started okay, but it just got worse and worse, starting with the survivor protagonist's incredibly stupid decisions. I feel like the last few books I read all had plots that depended on the stupidity or irresponsibility of the main characters. Then I was disappointed and disgusted with other characters, and then the twists started to pile up and they were lame. I can't read this to you because it gets into spoiler stuff, but I wasn't totally shocked at the twist. Can't believe this has a rating of 4.09 and only 65 people gave it 1 star. That is a common trend. Most of the books on Kindle Unlimited that seemed like exclusives had outrageously high ratings, but just consider that a warning. The ratings for these books on both Goodreads and on Amazon are not always reflective of the quality of the book. I saw some horribly written books that scored over 4.0. Chronologically, the next one I read was actually a little bit after these two, but I'll lump it in here just because we're talking about thrillers. Stranger Danger by Steve Richer. The similarities between Stranger Danger and The Perfect Child were just uncanny. It was weird. I wrote, how is it that I read 2 books about naive, first-time foster parents taking in a child found in very similar traumatic circumstances who turns out to be evil within a couple weeks of each other? Both are books I found very disturbing that I have difficulty recommending to anyone, and I'm not sure why I ended up choosing them. But I do think I liked The Perfect Child better. It was more focused, more tightly wound, and ready to spring. After reading Disturbed and Stranger Danger and another book that I couldn't even finish because I hated it so much, I really felt like, oh man, aside from a couple gems, Kindle Unlimited is just full of garbage, and I'm depressed because people are rating these books so highly and they have terrible writing. People don't even know what good is anymore. Fortunately, it was around this point that I turned a corner and I found 2 series that I liked, And that's pretty much where I parked it for the rest of the Kindle Unlimited trial. One was a mystery series, and the other was a fairy tale retelling series. The mystery series was Squeaky Clean Mysteries by Christy Barritt. It's a set of 14 books. I believe the last 2 books are actually both part of this series and part of another series. Rather than go through the series one by one, I'll just give you an overview. The Squeaky Clean Mysteries star Gabby St. Clair, a young woman running her own business as a crime scene cleaner, which I thought was a very different take. She is an aspiring forensic scientist whose life and career got sidetracked by some personal tragedies, and that's why she's stuck cleaning crime scenes for a living. But in the first book, when she finds something at a crime scene that she believes is evidence that the police missed, she gets caught up in a search for the true guilty party. Over the course of the series, she solves crimes, starts advancing her career, develops friendships and romantic relationships, and in general matures as a human being. This is also a Christian series, and Gabby's spiritual growth is one of the themes that ties the series together, as is her struggle to deal with her personal relationships. Relationships with her friends, with her families, and with the guy that you know from the beginning she's supposed to be with. I can break this down into pros and cons. The pros: Gabby is likable, relatable, and has a funny, sarcastic sense of humor. Riley is great. The series has enjoyable side characters. I just wish we saw a little bit more of them. It had some interesting plot ideas. Handling of the Christian element was good, especially as the series advanced. Not ham-fisted, smoothly worked in. Gabby doesn't become a Christian and poof, like magic, she's a perfect person and all of her problems are solved. Gabby's character development overall is very realistic. She's the type person who takes 2 steps forward and then 1 step back, which can be frustrating for the reader, yes, but it's relatable. She gets held back by her doubts and her fears. She feels like if things are going too well for her, then something bad is bound to happen, and I get that. It's totally understandable. Some of the cons: overemphasis of Gabby's quirks became tedious. I get it, she wears flip-flops all the time, which I think is insane. Not just to wear flip-flops when it's cold outside, but especially because of all the fluids she comes in contact with her job, and just because everywhere she goes a dead body crosses her path, but also because of all the running around she does. She's also a musical theater fan, and it's mentioned many times that her mind works like a jukebox. I don't think that's that remarkable, and at times her musical theater street cred was suspect to me, being a musical fan myself. As a detective, she can be annoyingly impulsive and reckless, and get herself and other people who are with her into danger that I think could have been avoided. I wasn't always impressed with her detection skills. Number 1, she'd get a fixed idea about someone and just presume that they were up to no good and try to figure out how they might be guilty, to the point that she would occasionally ignore evidence that indicated that her assumption was wrong. Number 2, she'd occasionally miss something that I thought was obviously suspicious, which I found frustrating, especially when it turned out that I was right that that thing was suspicious. Number 3, a lot of the mysteries she doesn't exactly solve, she figures it out just before the murderer comes after her and reveals himself or herself. So I didn't exactly come away feeling like, oh wow, she's such a brilliant detective. I've said this before, I am not a person who usually figures out who done it. I have read a lot of murder mysteries in my life, and I have almost always been wrong or not been able to figure it out, and I like being surprised at the end. I like the big reveal and being like, oh my goodness, it was them all along. Going into a mystery, I don't expect to be able to figure out who done it, especially when it's clearly written to be a shock to the reader. You can tell when it's supposed to be a big shocking reveal, and I especially don't like it when I'm pretty confident fairly early on that I have figured out who the killer is, and then I have to wait through the rest of the book for the detective to catch up and to find out if I was right. And when it turns out I was right, it's really frustrating, because here I've been saying, like, you're forgetting about this thing that happened in the beginning that was so suspicious. Like, why are you thinking about that? Why aren't you paying attention? Go back and investigate that. And they're not listening to me. That happened a few times here. And then there was something else that developed in the middle of the series, 2 dreaded words for a lot of readers, love triangle. This love triangle was frustrating for a few reasons. Number one, it was so obvious from the very beginning that she and the main guy were supposed to be together, and then they were together, and then they get driven apart, and it's annoying. Number two, the interloper in the love triangle was a flirt who had the audacity to pursue a woman who was wearing an engagement ring, which in my opinion makes him a jerk, and while Gabby might have been able to forget that, I never did. So my opinion of this guy, no matter how many awesome things he did and how attractive he was always tainted. Number three, Gabby's reaction to something that I'm not going to tell you because it's a spoiler and maybe you're going to read this series. Her reaction, not to that event, but the fallout of that event, in my opinion, was totally overblown. I felt that she misinterpreted a character's words and actions, and it led to all this drama and angst, which could have been avoided if she just paid closer attention to what this person was saying. And the worst thing about that is that it felt like just another case where the author adds drama just for dramatic tension's sake. Just like in so many TV shows where two characters that everyone's been shipping finally get together, and then the writers immediately start coming up with things to pull them apart because they're afraid that the audience will no longer be interested now that those characters are together. They need tension and they need conflict, and it's like, can't you just leave them be? Forced drama like that backfires for me. I feel like just let this couple be normal and happy and let them solve mysteries together and be a great team, and yes, they will have hiccups and misunderstandings along the way, but that's part of a normal relationship. When it becomes this overblown thing and it's all angsty and stuff, that really pushes me away. Fortunately, that whole thing did resolve, and I liked the way it resolved, so it's not like a major drawback, like, don't read this series because it has this in it. As frustrating as it was, I could understand why it was happening. There were things that Gabby did that maybe I wouldn't do, and there were times that I just wanted to reach in the book and shake her a little bit, but it was relatable. As it is, I didn't end up completing the series, not because I wasn't enjoying it, but because I had 30 hours left of the trial, and there were 7 books, I think, that I wanted to read, and there was no way I was going to be able to fit them all in. So I weighed the 2 series, and I just decided, this one, I'm okay with not finishing it. I read 11 out of the 14 books, and really, book 10 felt like an ending, and then book 11 had Gabby take a step backward, which was a little irksome, and then that book ended with a nice, happy conclusion, and I felt like this is a good place to stop. So I did. My favorite, for anyone who's curious, was number 2, Suspicious Minds, which is the one where Gabby discovers the body of an Elwes impersonator in a creepy crawl space. It was probably the funniest one, and the supporting characters were great, and it also had a very good emotional subplot where Gabby goes through the house of a man who lived and died alone, and it leads her to learn some things about herself and about what she wants to happen in her life. The other series I read, and this one I completed, was the Timeless Fairy Tales series by K.M. Shea. I'm assuming it's Shea, as in shea butter. It was a set of 11 books, and I read all 11, although I kind of cheated. I did skim through some parts, and the last one I speed read as fast as I possibly could. That book was supposed to take about 5 hours to read, and I got through it in an hour. Yikes. The series title, Timeless Fairy Tales, is kind of unimaginative, and I think it's a poor reflection on the books themselves, which I thought were delightful. The prose, they are quick reads, they have creative twists on very familiar stories, both ones that have been given the retelling treatment dozens of times, and you feel like this has been done to death. Another Beauty and the Beast retelling? Really? Another Rumpelstiltskin retelling? Those have been pretty popular in the last 10 to 15 years. But there are also ones that aren't so familiar, and all of them I thought were very creatively done. These books have fun dialogue, great side characters, usually the funniest characters in the books, were siblings or parents or best friends. The romances are very sweet and charming and romantic, but in a family-friendly way. I had to think about this a little, but I think I would classify them as young adult. But it's not what has become stereotypical young adult. It does have strong female characters, some of whom are good fighters, but the occasional violence doesn't go overboard, and none of these young women are assassins, a trope that I'm getting pretty sick of at this point. Each book tells or retells a different fairy tale, but the stories are interwoven and tied into a main overarching conflict. These stories all occur in the same world, in the same time, and as the series develops, they start referencing each other. You can read them as standalones, and originally that's what I was going to do, because there were some that just, based on the title alone, I was more interested in reading than others. But I'm really glad that I didn't do that, and I would strongly recommend reading the series as it's written. That way you get the most out of the references, and you get the fun of seeing old characters pop up again and interact with each other. Maybe I felt this way because I was reading them all in such quick succession, but I felt that the characters are distinct enough that they don't blend together when they're all in one place, and the heroes and heroines all have different types of personalities. Those are the pros. The cons, the climactic action and the conclusions were a little messy, although I think that got better as the series went on. Books 1 and 2 really had the weakest endings, I thought, especially book 2, which kind of gives you like a choose your own hero ending. Do you want her to end up with this guy, or do you want her to end up with that guy? And I thought that was really strange. Something that some people might not like is that these books have occasional anachronistic dialogue. Characters use words like yeah and wow or newbie. That could pull some people out of it completely, but I felt like it was kind of part of the fun and the charm. Another thing is that there were some references to things in the past that made me feel like there was a big puzzle piece I was missing, a book or possibly a whole series published before that I hadn't read. Also, I thought the last book in the series, Snow White, would be the big conclusion, but while it does resolve its main conflict and some of the overarching conflict, there are still some loose ends. And at the very end of the book, it says to find out how this big issue gets resolved, read this other book, which isn't technically part of the series. Ah! I guess I would liken this series to Marissa Meyer's Lunar Chronicles, which I really liked because of the creativity in reworking the fairy tales and interweaving them into one huge narrative, and the humorous side characters and banter, they both have that. But this series doesn't have the science fiction-y angle, and it never gets as dark as the Lunar Chronicles did. It's pretty impossible for me to pick a favorite here. I really liked number 3, Cinderella and the Colonel, also number 4, Rumpelstiltskin. Number 5, The Little Selkie, was also much better than I expected. Number 6, Puss in Boots was tons of fun. Number 7, Swan Lake was good. Number 9, The Frog Prince was hilarious. And number 10, The 12 Dancing Princesses was much better than I expected. I intended to skim through that one because it had elves, and I'm not really into elves, but it was so good. So yeah, I really enjoyed this series, and I'm glad I can say I finished it. Although, can I really say that when I didn't read the other related books? Final thoughts. I am disappointed that I didn't get to finish a non-fiction book about the D-Day invasion from the perspective of 3 German soldiers who were there. It's basically a transcript with each German recalling his own nightmarish experiences. I read the first German's account, and I had every intention of continuing on with the other 2, and it was a short book, should have taken me just about 3 hours, but I never made it the priority, and I lost my chance. I also never made time for another World War II book, a historical fiction trilogy. I think it was called Of War and Windmills or something like that, but oh well, I don't know that I ever would have had time for that. Alright, that's it. That's the recap of everything I read while I had Kindle Unlimited. I read some good stuff. I also read some not so good stuff. Some stuff that I might have been better off not wasting my time on. If Amazon offers you a free trial, and I know they offered this free trial to a lot of people, also gave some other people an offer for half off, you might as well go for it. But I would say don't have the highest expectations. Don't expect the quality to be amazing. I don't know how much editing these books went through. Seems like maybe not a lot. And it shows. I saw typos, and that's one thing. But worse than that, I saw words that were not used correctly, words that I was pretty sure were not really words, and phrasing that was just really strange, and I felt like any editor worth his or her salt would pick up on this. Did anybody read through this besides the author? But I did find stuff I enjoyed, and I think that the books I liked ultimately outnumbered the books that I didn't care for so much, and overall, it was worth it. I mean, I didn't have to pay anything for it, so it definitely was worth it. That was nice. Is it worth it for a $10 monthly subscription? I don't know. Maybe. It depends. It depends on if there's actually stuff on there that you want to read. Because you might go through and you might not be able to find anything that appeals to you. It doesn't make any sense to me to pay for a subscription if you're not going to read or like what they have to offer. So I would say if you're gonna buy it, make sure there's something on there that you want to check out. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm going to edit it as quickly as I can and then go back to editing the other video that I filmed earlier this week that was supposed to go up on Wednesday, but then I pulled the plug on it temporarily so that I could keep reading. Maybe I'll publish it tomorrow if I can get it done fast enough. We'll see. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.